As the clock ticks down to a controversial execution, a loyal German shepherd refuses to give up on his beloved partner. But just when all hope seems lost, the wild instincts of this German shepherd reveal a hidden truth that shocks the nation and turns the entire case upside down. Witness how the bond between a German shepherd and his human changes everything in this powerful true story. Do you enjoy dramatic rescues and unbelievable German shepherd moments? Subscribe for more great German shepherd stories every day. The cold light of dawn barely crept through the narrow slit of a window high above Julia Carter's head. Even the beams of sunrise seemed reluctant to enter the stark, stone-walled isolation of Seacliff Correctional Facility. The clink of chains, the distant bark of orders, and the quiet shuffle of feet echoed through death row, a place that made time itself feel sticky, endless, and heavy with regret. But today was different. Today, every minute was precious because Julia Carter, once a decorated Navy K-9 officer, now a woman wrongfully convicted of murder, was living what was supposed to be her last day. She sat on the edge of her cot, hands trembling, mind drifting between numbness and panic. She had counted the days, the hours, and now the seconds, her chest aching from the weight of injustice and unfinished life. The only thing Julia asked for, as the end approached, was to see Blitz, her old K-9 partner. Her final wish wasn't for a priest, a meal, or forgiveness, but for one last moment with the German shepherd who had saved her more times than she could count. A dog she'd left behind, not by choice, but by the brutal machinery of fate. Across the hall, the prison staff whispered. Julia had a reputation. Tough, loyal, the kind who never gave up. It wasn't lost on Warden Elaine Blackwell, a woman steely enough to run Seacliff, but still human enough to recognize a desperate plea when she heard one. When Julia's fiancé, Evelyn Harper, called, her voice breaking, begging, "Let her see Blitz just once," something cracked in Blackwell's armor. Under the relentless scrutiny of the press and her own conscience, she finally relented. That afternoon, the door creaked open and in trotted Blitz. He looked older now. Gray flecks dusted his muzzle, and a slight limp haunted his gait, but his eyes were alert, burning with the memory of the woman he'd once followed into burning buildings and gunfire. The guard stood awkwardly in the corner, pretending not to watch, but it was impossible not to. Julia dropped to her knees, her hands, rough and calloused, shook as she reached for Blitz, afraid he'd forgotten her, afraid she'd lost even this. But Blitz surged forward, a whimper breaking from his throat, tail thumping so hard against the cement it echoed like a drum. He pressed himself against her chest, snuffling, whining, pawing at the stiff orange jumpsuit as if to dig through to the real Julia underneath. Julia buried her face in Blitz's fur, the world narrowing to the warmth of his body and the sweet, familiar smell that instantly transported her back, out of prison, back to a world where she mattered. The room was silent except for her ragged breathing and the soft sound of Blitz's tail. Then something strange happened. Blitz's nose darted to Julia's old army jacket, one she'd been allowed to keep, her only keepsake from a former life. He fixated on it, pawing, whining louder, teeth tugging at a patch stitched just above the heart. He wouldn't stop. It was as if the jacket hid something vital, something urgent. The guards looked uneasy. Julia pulled the jacket close, trying to calm him, but Blitz only grew more frantic, his whole body vibrating with urgency. It wasn't just longing, Julia realized. There was something Blitz was trying to tell her, something wrong, something she'd missed. Her mind spun. Could it be evidence? A clue? She had relived the night of the murder in her mind 1,000 times, always ending with the same cold, dead end. But Blitz, who'd been with her through war, through trauma, through the worst days of her life, he'd never been wrong before. Julia's hands shook harder. She looked up, locking eyes with the warden. "Please," she choked out. "He's trying to show us something. Please look at the jacket." The guards shifted, unsure, but Blackwell nodded grimly. "Let's have it examined." Blitz sat back on his haunches, watching, panting, eyes wide and desperate. He pressed his head into Julia's lap, not ready to let go. The air in the cell grew heavy, guards turning away, unable to witness the rawness of the moment. Outside the window, the world continued as if nothing had changed, but inside, everything was different. Blitz's frantic behavior, his obsession with the jacket, suddenly felt like the last hope Julia had, one that no one else had believed in until now. As the minutes ticked down, and Blitz refused to be pulled from Julia's side, a question hung in the air, thick and unspoken. What if Blitz was the only one who could save her? What if there was still something left to find, some sliver of truth buried beneath years of sorrow and lies? Julia held Blitz tighter, whispering into his ear, "Don't leave me. Not yet." And in that fragile embrace, beneath the shadow of the execution chamber, a glimmer of hope flickered, small, uncertain, but alive. The visitation room was a sterile box, too bright, too white, humming with fluorescent light and the faint, clinging smell of disinfectant. Julia sat on one side of a battered metal table, wrists free for once, but still marked by old bruises. Blitz sat at her feet, refusing to leave her side, casting worried glances at anyone who came too close. Evelyn Harper, her fiancé, waited on the other side of the glass, her hands pressed flat on the cold divider, knuckles white. She'd spent the night awake, scrolling through old messages and news reports, searching for hope in legal jargon, her heart racing every time the phone rang. Today, her eyes were puffy from crying, but her voice was steady. She would not let Julia see her break, not here. A single guard waited by the door, nervous, shifting from foot to foot. He didn't want to be here. No one ever did when the countdown was on. Blitz's agitation had not faded. If anything, it had sharpened into a focus that was both uncanny and deeply unsettling. He kept returning to Julia's jacket, nosing, sniffing, pawing at a faded patch above the heart. He barked sharply, a low, guttural warning, before pawing again, claws raking the thick fabric. Evelyn leaned forward, her breath fogging the glass. "What's wrong with him?" Julia met her gaze, her own fear mirrored in Evelyn's eyes. "Oh, he won't stop. There's something about this jacket." Blitz barked again, louder this time, then whined and licked Julia's hand, pushing the jacket toward her. It was almost as if he was pleading. On impulse, Evelyn pressed the intercom button, voice tense. "Warden Blackwell, I need you in here." A moment later, the warden entered, flanked by a second guard. She took in the scene, Julia's desperate face, Evelyn's urgency, and Blitz's singular obsession. "What's this about?" Blackwell asked, arms folded. Evelyn's voice shook but did not break. "You saw him yesterday. He's not just excited. He's trying to show us something. Please, can you have the jacket checked right now? There might be evidence. He's never acted like this, not even when Julia was deployed." The room went silent except for Blitz's anxious panting. Blackwell hesitated. She was not in the habit of being told what to do by inmates or their partners. But she saw something in Blitz's behavior, a kind of intelligence and urgency that was hard to dismiss. She signaled to a guard, "Bag it, send it to forensics, immediately." Julia let go of the jacket reluctantly, heart pounding. Blitz whined, eyes locked on the departing guard. As the jacket left the room, so did the little comfort she'd felt. Julia gripped the edge of the table, fighting the rising tide of dread. What if he's right? What if there's something we all missed? Evelyn's face was tight with hope and terror. "He's never failed you. Not once. I trust him more than anyone." Blitz whined again, then laid his head on Julia's knee, tail thumping weakly. The guard stepped back, clearly rattled by the emotion in the room. Meanwhile, across town, Detective Ray Maddox sat in his cluttered office, sweat beading on his forehead as he shuffled through a file that had haunted him for years. The Carter case. The one that had made his career, then nearly destroyed it. He'd spent the last week in a haze, replaying every detail, the missing evidence, the broken Rolex watch, the fixer he'd seen in surveillance photos but never identified. His conscience gnawed at him like a hungry rat. He picked up the phone, hands shaking, and dialed the forensics lab. "Run the new evidence as soon as it comes in, and check the jacket for anything, fibers, blood, anything unusual. Cross-check with the original crime scene report. I want every detail." He hung up, breath ragged, then looked at the old Polaroid pinned above his desk. Julia and Blitz in uniform, grinning under a tattered American flag. Maddox felt a lump rise in his throat. He was late, maybe too late. but he would not let Julia die if he could help it, not for something she didn't do. Back at Seacliff, the air buzzed with anxiety. Evelyn paced the hallway, making calls, lawyers, journalists, anyone who might help if new evidence came through. The clock was merciless. Less than 8 hours until execution. Blackwell called Julia into her office. "We gotta stay. 2 hours. That's all I could get. If the forensics lab doesn't find anything..." Julia blinked, hope flickering like a candle in the wind. "That's all I need." In the visitation room, Blitz paced restlessly, whining at the door. Evelyn re-entered, kneeling beside him, stroking his fur, murmuring, "Hang on, boy, just a little longer." As the minutes crawled by, Maddox was racing against time. He uncovered old crime scene photos, a shattered watch, blood on a patch of grass, and barely visible, a shadowy figure removing something from Julia's jacket. He scanned through interviews, witness statements, a line about a fixer who'd been paid to disappear evidence. All the pieces began to shift, the shape of a new truth emerging. Suddenly the lab called. "We found a foreign substance sewn into the jacket patch, metal filings and traces of blood, not Julia's, and there's stitching that matches the night of the murder." Maddox's heart pounded. He grabbed his coat, running for his car. The clock was still ticking, but now there was a sliver of hope. Thin, fragile, but real. Back at the prison, Julia waited, clinging to Blitz, who pressed against her legs, refusing to move. Evelyn clung to her hand, refusing to let the moment slip away. The tension in the room was electric, a mixture of hope, dread, and the raw, unfiltered love between a woman and the dog who had never once doubted her. For the first time in years, Julia felt a spark deep inside her chest. Maybe she wasn't alone. Maybe the truth would win out even now, in the final hours. Outside, a storm began to roll in, thunder echoing like distant gunfire. But inside, Julia, Evelyn, and Blitz prepared for the next fight, one they would not lose without a battle. Seacliff Correctional's night shift was always quieter, lonelier, the concrete corridors whispering with ghosts of regret. Julia Carter sat on the hard cot in her cell, back pressed to cold stone, knees pulled up to her chest. Blitz lay on the thin blanket at her feet, eyes shining in the gloom, his breath slow and steady. Somewhere down the block, a radio played old blues, just loud enough to remind Julia that life continued, even for the condemned. The reprieve, 2 hours carved out by hope and desperation, stretched and contracted in her mind. For once, she wasn't counting down to her own death. Instead, she replayed memories, the bright ones full of sunlight and wind, and the dark ones edged in flame and guilt. She let her head fall back, eyes tracing the cracks in the ceiling. She tried to remember what it was like to trust the world. Chapter 2. Blitz's gentle snoring grounded her, kept the shadows from creeping too close. He'd always done that, long before these walls, before the trial and the betrayals. Julia's mind drifted to their first days together. A rescue mission gone wrong, a warehouse on fire, smoke so thick it burned her lungs raw. Blitz had burst through the flames, then just a trembling rookie, scared but unbreakable. He'd dragged her from the inferno when she was too dazed to move, barking and refusing to leave her behind. That was the beginning. In the years that followed, Blitz became more than a partner. He became her anchor. During long deployments, when sleep was a distant dream and fear pressed in from every corner, it was Blitz who'd kept her present. When the nightmares came, her old CO screaming, men bleeding out in sand, her own hands shaking, Blitz would curl against her side, nuzzling her until her heart slowed and the terror faded. He'd never asked for anything but love. She swallowed hard, running a hand through his coarse fur. "Sorry, buddy," she whispered. "Sorry for leaving you. Sorry for everything I missed." Blitz's ear twitched. He pressed his nose against her palm, letting out a huff that was half comfort, half sorrow. The cell felt smaller than ever. The memories swirled, pulling her back to the night everything fell apart. The night of the murder. She saw herself exhausted, fumbling with her keys in the parking lot behind the old warehouse. Blitz, still in his harness, pulled at her sleeve, eager, alert, as if he'd caught a scent Julia couldn't detect. She remembered brushing him off, thinking only of the rain, the fatigue, the ache behind her eyes. She'd gotten the call an hour later. A man dead, her prints found on the weapon, her jacket stained with blood she didn't remember spilling. The details never quite fit, but her alibi had been waterlogged, washed away by confusion and the quicksand of public outrage. Blitz, who'd barked and pawed at her jacket that night, had tried to warn her, but she hadn't listened, hadn't wanted to see what he saw. Now, in the stillness, Julia realized just how much that choice haunted her. What if she'd paid attention? What had Blitz known that she'd ignored? Her chest tightened. Time seemed to bend as she slipped deeper into memory. She remembered standing on the witness stand, heart racing, mouth dry. The DA's voice, cool, relentless, had tried to paint her as unstable, desperate, prone to violence. They'd ignored her service record, her medals, her spotless years of loyalty. Even Blitz's testimony, a series of videos showing him responding to her voice, obeying commands with flawless precision, hadn't swayed the jury. Now, with Blitz pressed close, she let herself cry. Not the tears of fear or anger, but a sorrow that came from deep inside, a place where hope and regret tangled like old roots. She whispered, "You did everything right." "And I should have listened. I should have—" Blitz shifted, rising to rest his chin on her knee. His brown eyes, luminous in the half-light, were full of trust. No judgment, no blame, just the same loyalty that had survived wars and prisons alike. Julia wiped her eyes. She looked at her hands, scarred, calloused, still trembling. "We'll get out," she said softly, more to herself than to Blitz. "We'll find a way." The old army jacket lay across her lap, battered and heavy with memory. She ran her fingers over the patch Blitz had fixated on. There was something there, something she'd missed all along. If she closed her eyes, she could almost remember the night, Blitz nosing at the patch, tugging with his teeth, refusing to let go until she finally shrugged him off. A single choice, a missed sign. That's all it took to tip a life off its axis. The hours crawled. Julia drifted between memory and the present, fear and fragile hope. Once a guard passed by, peering in through the slot. He saw the woman huddled with her dog, shoulders shaking, not with fear, but with something more complicated, more human. When the footsteps faded, Julia whispered, "You're my only family, my only proof I'm still good." Blitz let out a low whine, curling tighter against her. Somewhere, the storm battered the walls. Lightning flashed, thunder rolled, and the wind rattled her barred window. But inside, in the tiny warmth she shared with Blitz, Julia found herself daring to believe. If she could just listen, really listen, to what Blitz was trying to say, maybe she could still change her fate. Maybe for the first time in years, the truth wasn't buried after all. In those long, lonely hours, Julia promised herself that if she ever got free, she would never brush aside Blitz's instincts again. She would trust, not just in him, but in herself. And as dawn crept toward the horizon, Julia finally slept, one hand tangled in Blitz's fur, her dreams less haunted than before. For the first time since her conviction, hope fluttered, shy and uncertain, in her chest. Evelyn Harper's hands shook as she fumbled with her keys, struggling to open the battered door to her apartment. Blitz's leash was wrapped loosely around her wrist, but the big shepherd lagged behind on the rain-slicked steps, moving with a sluggishness that made Evelyn's heart clench. She coaxed gently, "Come on, boy," her voice soft, almost pleading. Blitz obeyed, but his usual energy was gone. He padded inside, tail low, eyes dull, and immediately curled up in his usual spot by the window, gazing out as if waiting for someone he'd lost. Outside, the city was waking. Sirens in the distance, the metallic screech of garbage trucks, the ever-present scent of wet concrete and exhaust. But inside, everything was muted, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Evelyn tossed her soaked coat aside and dropped to her knees beside Blitz. She stroked his ears, burying her face in his fur, tears slipping out before she could stop them. "Hang in there, buddy. She needs you. We both do." Blitz thumped his tail, barely, and gave a tired lick to her hand. But his gaze drifted back to the window, nose twitching, searching for the scent of someone he could no longer protect. Meanwhile, in his tiny office crowded with old case files, Detective Ray Maddox stared at his reflection in the dark window. The bags under his eyes were heavier than ever, but he couldn't let himself sleep. Not now. The Carter case had become a tumor in his mind, an infection of guilt and shame that wouldn't leave him alone. Every new fact he uncovered only deepened the pit in his stomach. Missing crime scene photos, a fixer who had vanished into thin air, a bloody watch stem no one ever accounted for. Worst of all was the knowledge that he had let pressure, politics, and pride push him into accepting easy answers. He picked up the phone, dialing a number he'd memorized, but never used. Evelyn answered, her voice raw. "I'm sorry to call so early," Maddox said, struggling to keep his voice steady, "but you deserve to know. I found more inconsistencies, old evidence, things that don't add up. And I need to admit something. I should have seen it years ago. I let them railroad Julia. I let her down." Evelyn didn't say anything for a long moment. He heard her breathing, soft and ragged. "What do you want from me?" she finally asked, voice tight with pain. "Just let me help now. I owe Julia everything. I owe Blitz too. I won't stop. Not until the truth is out." Blitz's decline was swift. He stopped eating, ignoring the treats Evelyn placed by his bowl, chicken, beef, even a sliver of cheese, all untouched. He barely moved except to shuffle closer to the door whenever a car passed, hope flickering and dying each time it wasn't Julia. Evelyn tried everything, long walks in the rain, whispered promises, even desperate prayers, but Blitz was slipping. She spent sleepless nights curled beside him, crying into his fur, murmuring stories of better days and impossible hopes. "You're her only family left, Blitz. You're the last piece of her heart. Don't leave me too." The room was filled with the quiet hum of appliances, the soft whir of rain against the window, and the muffled sound of Evelyn's grief. Maddox's obsession deepened. He returned to the precinct after hours, combing through old files, reliving every step of the original investigation. He found himself standing in front of the evidence locker, staring at the empty slot where the broken Rolex stem should have been, gone, like so many other truths. He called the new ADA, his voice tight. "You need to reopen the forensics on Julia Carter. There's more here, enough to call off the execution. I know I'm the last person you want to hear this from, but you have to believe me." Silence. Then the ADA spoke, tired and impatient. "We'll see what the warden says." Maddox hung up, fighting the urge to smash his fist into the wall. Instead, he sat heavily at his desk and whispered to the empty room, "I can't let an innocent woman die for my mistakes." At home, Evelyn's desperation became resolve. She pressed her lips to Blitz's head, swearing, "I won't give up, no matter what they say. You hear me? We're getting her out." She scoured the internet, sent emails to every advocacy group she could find, and called Maddox again, demanding updates, forcing herself to believe that one more call, one more plea might shift the balance. Blitz, growing weaker, looked at her with deep, sorrowful eyes. His breath rattled softly. But in those moments there was still a spark, a flicker of hope, a dog's stubborn faith that his person would come back. Late that night, Evelyn awoke to find Blitz standing, swaying slightly by the door. He stared at Julia's jacket, which Evelyn had draped over the arm of the sofa, his gaze intense. With great effort, Blitz nudged it, pawing at the patch like before. Evelyn rushed to his side, heart pounding. "What is it, boy? What are you trying to tell me?" She examined the patch, feeling a faint lump beneath the fabric, a tiny, hard shape she'd never noticed. Her hands shook as she called Maddox. "There's something inside the jacket. You need to come. Now." As dawn began to break, The threads that held Julia's world together, Evelyn's determination, Maddox's guilt, and Blitz's undying loyalty, pulled tighter. None of them could rest, not while the truth still fought to surface, not while the system threatened to crush them all. Blitz, weakened but undefeated, curled at Evelyn's side as the first rays of sun split the gray. For a moment he lifted his head, ears pricking, as if hearing Julia's voice in the distance. Evelyn laid her hand on his back, whispering, "Hold on, Blitz. Just a little longer. We're not giving up." In the quiet that followed, hope didn't roar. It whispered. It lived in small acts. A dog refusing to let go, a detective refusing to look away, a woman refusing to stop loving. The ties that bound them, worn, battered, stretched to their limit, held strong against the storm. Storm clouds had rolled in over Seacliff, painting the sky the color of bruises. The clock in the warden's office ticked louder with each second that Julia Carter's life hung in the balance. In one corner, Evelyn Harper clutched Blitz's leash in a white-knuckled fist, while Detective Maddox paced near the rain-streaked window, phone pressed tight to his ear. Even Warden Blackwell, so often a figure of iron, looked worn down, her jaw clenched as she scanned urgent messages from the governor's office and the ADA. "We're running out of time," Blackwell said, her voice barely above a whisper. Lightning flashed. Outside, sirens wailed, distant and lonely. Evelyn pressed a trembling hand to Blitz's head. The shepherd was lying at her feet, shivering, his eyes glassy but alert, following every movement in the room. He let out a weak whine when Julia's name was spoken. Suddenly, Maddox slammed the phone down. "Forensics says they're almost done," he said, voice ragged. "But there's something else. You all need to see this." He placed his laptop on the desk and pulled up grainy surveillance footage from the night of the murder. The camera view was angled badly, but it was enough. Julia walking to her car, Blitz at her side, exhausted and unaware. Then a shadow, someone lurking at the edge of the frame, face hidden. In the next moment, the shadow planted something in Julia's trunk, then slipped away, pausing just long enough to remove the jacket she'd left on the seat. Evelyn's jaw dropped. "They set her up," Maddox nodded grimly. "And that shadow? I found a match in another case, known fixer, paid off more than one dirty job for the prosecutor's friends." The room went silent but for the rain and the relentless tick-tick-tick of the clock. Just then, Blitz gave a low, choked cough. Evelyn knelt by his side, heart pounding. "Blitz, what's wrong, boy?" Blitz's breaths grew harsher. He tried to stand, then stumbled. Panic rose in Evelyn's throat as she realized something was terribly wrong. Maddox knelt beside her, examining Blitz's mouth. "There's blood," he said softly, as he noticed a metallic glint caught between Blitz's teeth and lips. Blitz suddenly retched, coughing up a small, jagged object onto the tile floor, a piece of metal, tarnished but unmistakable. Warden Blackwell scooped it up with a tissue, frowning. "Is this?" Maddox's eyes widened. "That's the broken stem from the victim's Rolex, the one we never found." Evelyn felt a surge of hope, mixing with fear for Blitz. "You mean he's had it all this time? In his stomach?" "It's possible," Maddox said, his voice trembling. "He must have picked it up that night, maybe even swallowed it by accident. No wonder he was so obsessed with the jacket. He was trying to tell us." Without waiting, Blackwell snapped out orders for an emergency vet. Evelyn scooped Blitz into her arms, tears streaking her face as she kissed his muzzle. "You held on, boy, just like she did." As Blitz was rushed out, Maddox turned to Blackwell. "Get that to the lab. We're not letting Julia die tonight, not for someone else's crime." At the vet, time was a knife. Evelyn watched Blitz fade in and out, the monitors beeping steadily as the team worked over him. The vet, a soft-spoken woman with sharp eyes, X-rayed Blitz's abdomen and found more traces of metal. "He's lucky it didn't kill him," she murmured. "He must really love her." Evelyn, exhausted, pressed her head to Blitz's side, whispering, "You're the bravest soul I've ever known." Back at Seacliff, Julia waited in a bare cell, not knowing whether hope or heartbreak was coming for her. Her thoughts swirled with images: Blitz licking her hand, Evelyn's smile through glass, Maddox's haunted eyes. Each memory sharpened her longing for a future she could barely imagine. Suddenly, the cell door banged open. Warden Blackwell, cheeks flushed with adrenaline, strode in. "Julia, you need to come with me." They hurried to the warden's office where Maddox and Evelyn were waiting, the storm raging just beyond the thick glass. Maddox held up a small evidence bag. Inside glittered the broken Rolex stem. Evelyn ran to Julia, grabbing her hands. "Blitz found it." "He never gave up on you. Neither did we." Julia's knees nearly buckled. She squeezed Evelyn's hands, her breath hitching in her throat. Maddox explained quickly. "Forensics tested it. The stem matches the victim's watch. That means the timeline they used at trial is impossible. This proves you were framed. We have footage of the real killer. And now we have this. They're calling the judge right now." As if on cue, Blackwell's phone rang. She listened, then nodded. "There's an emergency hearing scheduled tonight." Julia closed her eyes, fighting back tears, of relief, of exhaustion, of a hope that felt almost too dangerous to claim. Blitz, weak but alive, was transferred to a recovery room. Evelyn pressed her face to the glass, whispering thanks as the vet smiled. "He's going to make it. Tough dog." In the waiting room, Maddox sat beside Julia, unable to meet her gaze. After a moment, he murmured, "I'm sorry for what I did." "For what I didn't do." Julia shook her head, her voice raw but steady. "Don't waste time on that now. Help me get home." For the first time in years, the storm outside seemed to carry a different promise. Not destruction, but rebirth. As thunder rolled, Julia stared into the dark, clutching Evelyn's hand and whispering a silent promise to Blitz, her dog, her savior, the soul who never let go. Night pressed hard against the courthouse windows, rain streaking down in frantic rivers. The emergency hearing was convened with a sense of urgency that vibrated in the very air. News vans and curious onlookers clustered outside, faces bright in the glare of camera lights. Inside, the old wood-paneled courtroom was packed. Press, guards, lawyers, and a handful of people who'd been following Julia Carter's case since the first tragic headline. Julia entered in handcuffs, flanked by two deputies, chin high, shoulders squared, but face pale and hollow-eyed from exhaustion. Her jumpsuit felt heavier than ever. At the defense table, Evelyn waited, her presence a steady flame in a storm. Blitz, recovering and freshly bandaged, sat by her side, a living symbol of loyalty, his gaze fixed on Julia. Detective Maddox, wearing yesterday's suit and the haunted look of a man fighting for redemption, stood near the front, clutching files and evidence bags. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for integrity, called the court to order. "Ms. Carter, you've been granted this hearing under extraordinary circumstances," she intoned. "Your life is literally in the balance. Let's get to the evidence." The prosecutor, pale and sweating, shifted in his seat. For years he'd painted Julia as a monster. Now the narrative was slipping from his grasp. Maddox rose, clearing his throat. He spoke with a voice stripped of ego, built on regret and hard-won clarity. "Your Honor, we have new evidence, physical and forensic, that fundamentally changes the case against Julia Carter." He walked the judge through the chain of events. The broken Rolex stem, long missing, now found and extracted from Blitz's body. The video footage, newly uncovered, of a masked man, known fixer, planting evidence and stealing Julia's jacket on the night of the murder. The records of a payoff linked to the original prosecutor. As Maddox spoke, he held up the evidence bag. The courtroom was silent but for the patter of rain and the scratching of reporters' pens. The lab technician testified next, holding up a photograph of the stem, explaining how its presence inside Blitz and the matching metal shavings in Julia's jacket proved she had been set up. The timeline, she said, no longer fit the prosecution's theory. "There is simply no way Miss Carter could have committed the crime with this evidence in play," the technician concluded. Evelyn's heart hammered in her chest. She squeezed Blitz's paw, whispering, "Almost there, boy." Blitz, tail flicking, sat tall, calm, proud, and vigilant. The entire courtroom watched as the judge leaned forward, her eyes never leaving Julia. Finally, Maddox introduced the last piece, Blitz himself. "This dog," he said, voice trembling, "saved Julia's life more than once. And tonight, he may have done it again." He identified the key evidence, even when the rest of us couldn't see it. There was a murmur from the crowd, some skeptical, some awed. But the judge nodded, her expression softening for the briefest moment. The prosecutor, face ashen, tried to regain control. "Your Honor, this is all highly irregular." But the judge cut him off. "Irregular, or just justice finally being served, this case is a stain on this court and this city. I want the person responsible for the real crime in custody before the sun comes up. Am I understood?" At that, the fixer, the man caught on tape, was brought in, handcuffed and stone-faced. Confronted with the evidence, the threat of perjury, and the eyes of the press, his bravado crumbled. He confessed in broken sentences, implicating the prosecutor's office and the men who'd paid him to cover the real killer's tracks. Gasps rippled through the room. Julia, too numb for triumph, simply watched, unable to process the sudden tilt of fate. The judge's gavel rang out. "Julia Carter, you are hereby exonerated of all charges. This court apologizes for the miscarriage of justice. You are free to go, effective immediately. Bailiff, unlock those cuffs." For a heartbeat, the world froze. Julia's hands shook as the cuffs fell away. She blinked in disbelief, the world spinning in 1,000 directions at once. Evelyn launched to her side, arms flung tight around Julia's shoulders. The two women clung together, sobbing, relief, exhaustion, love, all tangled into one tidal wave. Blitz pushed his head between them, barking, a joyful, triumphant sound that echoed through the courtroom. Reporters rushed to the front, cameras flashing. The judge, voice softer now, addressed Julia directly. "What was done to you is unforgivable. You have your life back. I hope you use it to find peace and to help others who aren't as lucky." Julia could only nod, her voice gone, her eyes wet. Outside, in the glare of morning headlights, Julia stood in the rain, no longer a prisoner. The first thing she did was drop to her knees, arms around Blitz, burying her face in his neck. "You did it," she whispered. "You saved me. Again." The crowd began to cheer as Blitz barked once, twice, loud enough to wake the city. Evelyn kissed Julia's cheek, her own face radiant with hope. Detective Maddox, standing nearby, watched them, his own eyes red, not with shame this time, but with the fragile relief of a man finally choosing the right side. The press surged forward, shouting questions, snapping pictures, but Julia ignored them all. She held Evelyn's hand and Blitz's collar, the three of them together at last, as dawn crept over the courthouse and washed the darkness away. Rain-washed sunrise broke over Seacliff Correctional, turning the razor wire and stone into liquid gold. The massive gates groaned open, and for the first time in years, Julia Carter stepped into open air not as a number, but as herself. She hesitated at the threshold, the world unfamiliar and impossibly bright after so many mornings spent behind bars. All around her, guards, staff, and even a few inmates watched from the windows, curiosity, guilt, and hope mingling on their faces. Evelyn was waiting, hair damp from the drizzle, eyes shining with unshed tears. She wore the old jacket that had nearly cost Julia her life, but had also saved it, and in her arms Blitz trembled with excitement, tail thumping against her thigh. As Julia approached, Blitz let out a bark that shattered the hush like a bell. Evelyn set him down and he charged, wobbly but fierce, throwing his weight into Julia's legs. Julia fell to her knees in the wet grass. Blitz licked her face, pawed at her chest, and then pressed his head into her heart. She buried her face in his fur, letting herself sob for the first time since she'd heard the words, "You are free." Rain mingled with her tears, cleansing and electric. A crowd gathered, media, local neighbors, even former prison staff. Cameras flashed. The governor's envoy stepped forward, delivering a quick message. "The governor extends her apologies, Ms. Carter. An inquiry is underway. Your story will not be forgotten." But Julia hardly heard. Evelyn was there, kneeling in the grass beside her, hands steadying Julia's shaking shoulders. For a long moment, the three of them, woman, and dog, simply held each other, the rest of the world blurring into irrelevance. When Julia finally stood, Blitz at her side, the air felt sharp and new in her lungs. Reporters surged, shouting questions. "Ms. Carter, what's your first act as a free woman? How does it feel to be exonerated? Will you seek justice for others?" Julia shielded her eyes from the flashbulbs. Her voice, though cracked, was clear. "I want to go home with my family, and I want to thank the one who never gave up on me." She knelt and pressed her forehead to Blitz's. "You saved me, again," she whispered, her fingers tangled in his fur. Blitz wagged his tail, eyes bright with understanding. The moment was captured in 100 photos, one woman on her knees in the rain, a battered jacket, a loyal dog by her side. The image traveled across the country, stirring outrage and hope. That same morning, the governor went live on air, announcing a new task force to investigate wrongful convictions and abuses of power. "The story of Julia Carter is not unique," she said, "but we are making it right, starting today." The drive home was surreal. Evelyn gripped the wheel with one hand, the other never leaving Julia's knee. Blitz curled in the back seat, tongue lolling, windows cracked for the fresh scent of freedom. Julia watched the world rush by, houses, trees, playgrounds, people laughing on street corners. Everything felt impossibly alive, humming with potential and pain. They arrived to find neighbors waiting, some bearing casseroles, others simply staring. A few stepped forward awkwardly. "We're so sorry, Julia. We never believed. Well, we should have said something." Julia, drained but grateful, squeezed their hands. "Thank you for being here. I hope we can all move forward." Inside, the apartment was just as Julia remembered. Framed photos of her Navy days, Blitz's old chew toys under the couch, Evelyn's half-finished painting on the easel. She walked through the rooms, trailing her fingers over every surface, letting it become real. Blitz followed close, refusing to let her out of his sight. At the back window, he pressed his nose to the glass, watching the world he'd waited so long to rejoin. Julia joined him, sliding an arm around his shoulders. Evelyn came up behind them. "You're home, both of you. We get to start again." For a long time, they just stood together, silent, the city waking beyond their window. But freedom was not peace, not yet. News of Julia's exoneration spread fast, sparking protests, demands for transparency, and even threats. Former prosecutors and police officials faced questions. Survivors of the system wrote letters asking for her help. Late that night, the phone rang. Julia answered, wary, but the voice was gentle, the governor herself. "Ms. Carter, we're launching a full inquiry. We'd like your help to make sure no one else goes through what you did." Julia agreed, her mind already moving forward, determined not to waste the chance Blitz had bought with his pain. She spent her first night free, curled on the floor beside Blitz, Evelyn wrapped around them both. The dog's breath was slow and even, and for the first time in years, Julia's heart beat without fear. At sunrise, reporters camped outside her door. Julia stepped out with Blitz and Evelyn, facing them squarely. "What do you want people to learn from your story?" a young reporter asked. Julia looked at Blitz, then Evelyn. "That loyalty can change the world. That one act of faith, one refusal to give up, can ripple out farther than we know. I'm not a hero. Blitz is. He never stopped believing in me, even when I stopped believing in myself." The crowd applauded. The governor's aide stood nearby, notepad ready. The investigation had begun. As Julia and Evelyn led Blitz down the front steps, the three of them silhouetted against the morning sun, Julia felt something she hadn't dared to feel in years. Hope. Real, wild, overwhelming hope. In that moment, it was enough. A month after the storm that swept her free, Julia Carter found herself waking to a different kind of dawn. The apartment she shared with Evelyn and Blitz overlooked the restless blue of the Atlantic, windows open to the salt wind and the distant, reassuring clang of a bell buoy. For the first time in years, Julia woke without panic. She lay in bed, breathing in the scent of coffee and rain, listening to Blitz's snuffling snores from the rug beside her. Sunlight danced on the walls as she slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Evelyn. The woman she loved was curled beneath a quilt, one hand resting in the hollow Julia had left, her hair wild on the pillow. Julia brushed a kiss across her forehead and made her way to the living room, where Blitz was already up, tail wagging slow and steady. Blitz had changed. His fur was grayer, his walk a bit slower, but his eyes still burned with purpose. He nudged Julia's hand as she moved to the window, pressing his nose to the glass. "You ready for your walk, old man?" Julia whispered, fastening his leash. They strolled along the misty boardwalk, waves slapping the pilings, the world quiet except for their footsteps and the gulls. Julia watched Blitz sniff the air, ears perked despite his tired gait. Every morning with him was a gift she refused to take for granted. As they passed the park, a group of kids spotted Blitz. "That's him! That's the hero dog!" one shouted, running over with a battered tennis ball. Julia knelt, letting the kids crowd around. Blitz sat calmly, tongue lolling as they stroked his back and peppered Julia with questions. "Did he really save you? Is he famous? Can we give him a treat?" Julia laughed, rubbing Blitz's chest. "He saved me more than once, and yeah, he's a little bit famous, but he's always been my hero." A mother approached, pushing a stroller. "Thank you for speaking out," she said quietly, voice thick with emotion. "My brother, he was locked up for something he didn't do. Your story gave us hope." Julia squeezed her hand. "Hope's the only thing they couldn't take from us. Not really." Later that week, the governor invited Julia and Blitz to the state capitol. The old courthouse was packed with press and supporters, along with veterans, rescue workers, and children clutching hand-drawn signs. "Thank you, Blitz," and "Justice for Julia." The atmosphere buzzed with something Julia hadn't felt in years: community. Governor Stein presented Blitz with the Medal of Valor. As the crowd applauded, Julia knelt beside him, fingers shaking. Blitz, dignified in a blue and gold ribbon, pressed against her. "He's more than a service animal," Julia said into the microphone. "He's proof that loyalty, instinct, and courage save lives, and that animals like Blitz deserve our protection too." The room erupted in cheers. Blitz barked once, the sound echoing off marble walls. Governor Stein handed Julia an official letter, an apology from the state, and a promise of compensation for the years stolen from her life. The funds, Julia decided, wouldn't just change her own future. They'd fund a new project, a nonprofit for PTSD veterans and retired canines, dedicated to giving both humans and animals a second chance. Back at home, life settled into a rhythm both precious and precarious. Julia spent her afternoons at the VA hospital, volunteering with therapy dogs, sharing her story with vets whose eyes mirrored her own old wounds. Blitz, though slowing down, relished the attention and the treats. Children would climb into his lap, their laughter softening the hard edges of his days. Sometimes, when the nights were quiet and the waves pounded the shore, Julia would wake to find Blitz standing at the back door, nose to the glass, as if searching for someone. She'd kneel beside him, stroking his fur, feeling the steady thump of his heart against her palm. Evelyn worried quietly. She saw the limp, the way Blitz sometimes struggled for breath. Julia faced each checkup with a steadying resolve, determined to give him as many good days as possible. One late afternoon, as the sky flared with sunset, the vet delivered the news Julia had been bracing for. "His cancer's advanced," she said gently. "We'll keep him comfortable. He's got a little time yet, and he's happy. That's what matters." Julia nodded, refusing to weep. "He's had more than most, and so have I." With the last months ticking down, Julia made every moment count. She and Evelyn took Blitz to the beach every day, letting him chase the waves, barking at gulls and rolling in the warm sand. She spoke at schools, telling Blitz's story, showing that one voice, human or canine, could change a system. A local news team filmed a short documentary, and soon Blitz's story was everywhere. On morning TV, in viral videos, even in a children's book about hope and courage. Mail flooded their home. Letters from prisoners, officers, kids, strangers. Julia and Evelyn read them all, Blitz snoozing between them, a contented smile on his gray muzzle. The legislature responded. In Blitz's honor, The state passed Blitz's Law, new protections for service animals, and sweeping reforms for reviewing wrongful convictions. His name became a symbol for justice, proof that change could start with one stubborn, loyal dog. On his last good night, with a breeze rustling the curtains and the moon silver on the water, Julia sat with Blitz in her lap. She whispered, "Every sunrise, every walk, every single day with you was a miracle. Thank you for never letting go." Blitz thumped his tail, eyes soft with trust and love. Julia didn't cry. Not then. She simply held him, heart full, grateful for the last gift he'd given her. Time to heal, to hope, and to believe again. Sunset on the coast turned the sky into a watercolor of lavender and gold. A crowd was gathering on the beach near Julia and Evelyn's new home, lanterns flickering in the growing dusk, the wind salty and sweet. Julia stood at the edge of it all, one arm around Evelyn, the other hand holding Blitz's leash. The old shepherd, thinner now, moved slowly but held his head high. He wore his Medal of Valor clipped to his collar, a little tarnished, but gleaming when the last light hit it. Families settled onto blankets and driftwood logs, children clutching stuffed animals or hand-drawn signs that said things like, "Blitz the Brave" and "Thank you, Julia." Veterans clustered together near the bonfire, their laughter rolling out into the evening, breaking against the hush of the waves. There were former prisoners too, some recently exonerated after Julia's case had opened the floodgates, some still fighting, all drawn here by a sense of belonging. Evelyn squeezed Julia's hand. "They're all here for you, for Blitz. Can you believe it?" Julia took a breath, the tang of ocean mixing with the warmth of hope in her chest. "Sometimes I can. Most days, I still think it's a dream." She knelt beside Blitz, brushing her fingers over his graying fur. The dog's eyes glowed, keen and soft, every inch the guardian and companion he'd always been. Julia pressed her forehead to his and felt him sigh, old, content, but never truly tired. As the sun dipped lower, Julia was called to the fire pit. She looked at Evelyn, who nodded, her smile gentle and proud. Julia walked to the circle, Blitz by her side, and stood in the wavering light as the crowd quieted. She began, voice clear but thick with feeling. "When you're caged by injustice, the darkness feels endless. Sometimes the only light you have is the loyalty of someone who won't give up on you, no matter how bad it gets." She paused, looking out at the faces lit by fire and hope. "Blitz never gave up. Not on me. Not even when I did." Julia glanced down at Blitz. "He didn't save me by following orders. He saved me by trusting his instincts, by refusing to be ignored, even when everyone else doubted." She saw Maddox near the back, hands in his pockets, face half-shadowed. "It took all of us to get here." It took Evelyn trusting what she felt, Maddox owning up to his mistakes, a governor brave enough to do the right thing, even when it meant admitting the state was wrong. Justice isn't one person's battle. It takes a community, and it takes the courage to listen to the voices, human or otherwise, that refuse to be silent. She turned to the veterans, the exonerated, the children. Sometimes we carry anger for so long we forget what it's like to lay it down. I spent years angry at the world, at myself, at everyone who turned away. But it was forgiveness that healed me in the end. Forgiveness for Maddox, for the people who failed me, for myself. A hush settled. The wind shifted, and somewhere in the crowd, a young woman wept quietly. Julia continued, "Blitz taught me resilience, the kind that isn't about being tough, but about having the courage to hope, even in the darkest cell. He taught me that when you're lost, you dig for the light, even if you have to claw it out of stone. And when you see injustice, you don't look away. You speak up, even if your voice shakes, even if no one listens the first time." She turned, scanning the faces, parents, children, people she'd helped and people she'd never met. The law changed because of a dog who refused to let go. But it was each of you, and your courage to believe, that made that possible. The light we share is brighter together. A small boy, solemn-faced, approached with a plush shepherd under his arm. "Is Blitz scared to die?" he asked softly, voice carrying in the hush. Julia knelt, calling the boy close. "I think Blitz knows he's not alone," she said gently. "He's taught us everything he needed to. He'll always be here, in every fight for someone who's lost, in every act of kindness. That's how love works. It doesn't end." The crowd was silent, some crying, some simply holding hands. Julia pressed her lips to Blitz's head, tears slipping down her face. "You didn't just save me, Blitz. You taught me that the light is always there, even if you have to dig for it." The bonfire snapped and crackled, flames sending embers into the violet sky. Evelyn came to stand beside Julia, wrapping her in a quiet, fierce hug. Maddox stepped forward, nodding once, a silent apology and a promise to keep fighting for the innocent. People began lighting lanterns, sending them over the waves, a river of golden lights drifting out into the dusk, carrying wishes, grief, and hope far beyond the shore. As the last of the sun vanished, Julia spoke one last time. "We are the light for each other, for those who can't fight, for those who need someone to listen. Let's never forget that. Let's never give up on anyone, human or animal, who's lost in the dark." Blitz rested his head in Julia's lap, closing his eyes as the sound of applause, the rush of the sea, and the warmth of community folded gently around them. In the hush, Julia knew everything she'd endured had mattered, not just for her, but for everyone who might one day need to be found. Morning on the coast always started quiet, but today something was different. Julia woke before the sun, the hush of the house a gentle echo of peace. She lay for a moment listening to the waves roll in, the calls of gulls, and Evelyn's soft breathing beside her. Blitz's bed was empty. He'd moved slower in recent weeks, his legs stiffer, but he still rose to greet every dawn, every chance at another day. Julia found him on the porch, gazing out at the silver water, his fur lit by the first golden edge of sunrise. She sat beside him, slipping an arm around his neck. He leaned into her, a deep, satisfied sigh rumbling in his chest. The world was painted with promise, the sky pale pink, the ocean gleaming, their small town beginning to stir awake. Inside, Evelyn brewed coffee, humming an old tune as the scent drifted through the open window. Soon, all three were walking down to the shoreline, the air crisp and full of possibility. Blitz bounded after a stick Julia tossed, slower now, but still with the joy of a pup, tail sweeping wide arcs in the wet sand. Julia and Evelyn laughed, chasing after him, their shadows long and tangled on the empty beach. They passed familiar faces, neighbors, friends, people who had once doubted Julia but now stopped to offer smiles and hugs. Some thanked her for what she'd done. Others knelt to pet Blitz, murmuring stories of how his courage had given them hope for their own lost causes. Everywhere they went, the past felt less like a shackle, more like a lesson that could be shared, a story to inspire. As the sun climbed, Julia paused, turning to the invisible camera, her words reaching out to those who might be listening, those sitting with fear, with grief, or with a sense of injustice in their own hearts. "People ask me how I survived," she began, voice steady, gaze clear. "The truth is, I didn't do it alone. I was carried by loyalty, by courage, by one good dog, and a love that refused to let go. When I thought there was no hope left, Blitz believed for me, Evelyn believed for me, and because of them, I kept going. Sometimes, hope is a choice, not a guarantee. You have to fight for it, even when it feels impossible. Sometimes you have to be hope for someone else." She looked down at Blitz, who wagged his tail and nudged her hand. "This story isn't just mine. It's about all the small, brave choices people make every day, the moments they speak up, the times they refuse to look away when something feels wrong. Blitz's loyalty and Evelyn's faith started a ripple. Our fight for justice changed laws, inspired others to act, to question, to believe. You don't have to save the world alone. You just have to start somewhere." One voice, one act of kindness, one refusal to let injustice stand. Evelyn joined her, slipping an arm around Julia's waist, her own eyes shining with pride. Blitz pressed close, looking out over the waves. Julia smiled, voice trembling with gratitude. "We made it through the darkest night. We found light because we wouldn't let each other be lost. And now we get to be that light for others. She turned back to the audience, her words now a quiet plea. If this story meant something to you, please like and follow our channel, share it, and when you see someone suffering, when you see a wrong, don't look away. Be the light beyond the walls. As she finished, the town's church bells rang, carrying across the water. The three of them, Julia, Evelyn, and Blitz, walked on, faces to the sun, their shadows blending together on the sand. Later, as evening fell, the house filled with friends and laughter. Veterans Julia had helped, kids who'd once written letters to Blitz, neighbors who now came not out of curiosity, but out of respect. There was food and music, stories and remembrance. The pain of the past had softened, becoming part of something larger, something that couldn't be broken by lies or loss. As dusk settled, Julia sat quietly with Blitz on the porch, watching the world turn blue and gold. She pressed her cheek to his head and whispered, "You changed everything, old friend. For me, for all of us." In that final silent moment, Blitz, Evelyn, and Julia watching the world grow gentle and full of light. There was no trace of prison, no stain of injustice, only love, and the promise that after every night, the sun rises, that every act of courage echoes beyond the walls that try to keep us apart.